This podcast series is brought to you with the kind support of Darwin Alternative Investment Management Limited, which offers innovative, alpha-driven investment solutions that are uncorrelated with traditional asset classes and feature business areas which have not previously been considered by investment funds. The firm aims to create new opportunities for investors to further diversify their portfolios and achieve stable, absolute returns. I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the special 50 Faces Focus series, The Next Chapter, focusing on portfolio careers. In each episode of this four-part series, we will hear from seasoned professionals about what it takes to be an effective board or committee member and chair, and we will share some nuggets of their wisdom for careers and life. In our first podcast, we hear from Sally Bridgeland, Deb Clarke, Sharmila Kassam, and Caroline Burton. These women have had long investment management careers and use the experience gained there to add value to a range of non-profit and for-profit board and chair roles. Let's hear first from Sally Bridgeland, who needs no introduction in London institutional investing circles. Sally has had a long career as an actuary, investment consultant and investor, culminating in a role of CEO at BP Pension Trustees for the £19 billion BP Pension Fund. She has since pivoted to an extensive portfolio career, and since 2014 she has held roles at Nest, USS, Lloyds Banking Group, Avida International, RAF Central Fund, Nesta, the Nuclear Liabilities Fund, the Local Pensions Partnership, Impacts Asset Management and Royal London. Her portfolio is a very full one, but she still finds the time to commit to her passion for education in maths through the Royal Society and Loughborough University, and is honorary group captain in the Royal Air Force No. 601 Squadron. I asked Sally what core beliefs she had developed after her decades as an actuary and investment professional, and how she is resolute about focusing on the long term, and why this means that the big picture is always on her mind.
I think the time horizon is everything. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean just thinking about how long you measure investment performance on. It means you have to be able to imagine the world at the end of your time horizon and its path along the way, and what will have been the good things to have invested in along the way. And probably the most striking example of that is how we're now thinking about climate change. I'm a bit of an environmentalist. I've ridden a bike and certainly didn't have a car in most of my career. And it's taken a surprising long time for things, carbon and other aspects around climate change risks, to become risks that are actually borne by individual companies rather than being externalities, things that they didn't have to worry about so much. So if we thought about those investments then in the way that we think about them now, how would we have made different choices and how potentially would we have influenced the world? So I'm always trying to think a long term and what will be the factors, what will be the risks that we're exposed to just because of the demographic and social changes that we're likely to experience. So I guess that's a bit of the actuary coming at it in terms of the demographics, thinking about, well, what really matters to people and to society, and what should we be investing in to help make that world a less risky place. That's the most important thing. I think I do fundamentally believe in the importance of active management, the belief that we don't have perfect information, and if you can find particularly a thematic way of approaching the world that is different from just relying on short-term data flows, that you will have an advantage.
I asked her then what she brought to her portfolio career, and how her prior work as a consultant in particular enables her to grasp operational detail, and how we can adapt our new comfort level with hybrid work to our advantage in these roles by creating opportunities to dig deeper into various topics one by one.
So I think, I'm blessed with a real range of experience, and the role that I played in my consultancy career with the work in technology, and my passion from my personal life for flexible working means that from the operational side of things, I'm comfortable with the way that we're working now. In a way, it suits that. It's a slight introvert in me, I think, and the technological enthusiast that means that I'm quite happy working in the way that we're working right now. But there's nothing to beat the importance of relationships, and I think Zoom and Teams make that different. I don't think it's better. I don't think it's worse. It just means you probably have to think about it in a different way, have a different kind of battle rhythm to make sure that you've got that relationship right. That, for a non-executive, I think is really important. So whether you're a chair or just on a committee, it's a very, very part-time role. So you have to make the most of the touch points that you have. And if you're not fluent enough in the subject matter, it's really important to get the right kind of briefings outside the meetings. And what I'm finding at the moment is people are taking advantage of the technology and the easier logistics of setting up meetings to do more briefing sessions on technical subjects, to have more one-to-one catch-ups, which I think is improving the quality of some of those relationships. In terms of what makes a good member of a committee is it's a bit of a yin and yang thing. Whatever the executive or management are good at, the non-executive have to spot the gap. Are there weaknesses? Are they playing to their strengths? But also have they covered off the weaknesses? And in terms of being a good chairperson, it's really important to engage in the technicalities, the things that management are enthusiastic and passionate about and skilled at, and develop a relationship that means that if there's anything that's worrying them, that they can talk to you about it honestly. I've been in situations and seen clients or whatever where people have been anxious about putting things in front of a board or committee, and therefore the board and committee have been making decisions not blind but partially sighted, and that's not helpful. You really want to have all of the issues on the table. So if there are operational consequences of making a decision, that you understand those when you make the decision, rather than making it purely on the investment grounds, for example. So what makes a good chairperson is really having done your homework with the team beforehand to flush out the issues that are worth discussing, and then making sure that they're aired and everybody around the table deploys their skills to help solve any issues and add their wisdom and experience.
In this phase of her career, Sally plays to her strengths and leverages her comparative advantage.
I think the most important thing is about playing to your strengths. When I was at school, you were always encouraged to be an all-rounder, and I was a good all-rounder. I think in the line of in the world of business, you do tend to end up working harder on some of the things that you're weaker at, whereas actually I think you get most satisfaction out of thinking about the things that you're good at, that you're passionate about, and that somebody's willing to pay you to do a job for. It's a bit like Jim Collins's good to great on the hedgehog concept for companies. I think you should apply that on an individual basis, and don't worry so much about the route that you take. Some of the things that I did in my consulting career, because I was doing non-chargeable work and project work, it wasn't career enhancing within that organization. But in terms of the breadth of the opportunities and the skills that I've learned, looking back, it was absolutely the right thing for me to do, and I wouldn't have done it any other way.
We move now to another icon in London investment management and consulting circles. Debbie Clarke was Global Research Chair and Global Head of Investment Research at Mercer for close to 16 years, following an extensive career in asset management and consulting, which included 20 years as a portfolio manager. She's an active speaker on the conference circuit. She retired from position at Mercer in June 2021 and is now building a portfolio career, which now includes an NED on the board of BlackRock Group Limited. She's also a member of the UK CFA Institute Advisory Board. She's been voted in the Financial News 100 Most Influential Women in Asset Management in 6 of the last 9 years. I asked her about her next set of roles as she embarks on a portfolio career and what she wants to bring to these roles.
Well, I'm hoping that what I can do in the NED role is really to bring the breadth of my experience, to ask the right questions, to make sure that I'm going to BlackRock, as you say, on their email board, but also that the industry as a whole, making sure that we are as an industry held to account to make sure we're delivering the right outcomes for our clients and to make sure we're doing that in a way that is really authentic. I think I've tried throughout all of my career to be authentic. I have a strong sense of sort of fairness and wanting to try and do the right thing. and I hope I've done that over time. I'm sure there's been times I've slightly gone off course, but I genuinely want to try and do the right thing for all of the people involved in my life. And that's really what I see myself bringing to the board, is to make sure that I'm asking the questions, that I want to make sure areas such as ESG and D&I are actually as part of the board discussions, because I think in the past it's been very much focused on risk or audit. But actually, I think a sustainability board is something that's actually going to increasingly become important on corporate boards, because actually it deserves that attention. It deserves that seniority attention, because if it doesn't have that, again, it's not going to be intentional and you're not going to get the outcomes you want.
I asked her about the lessons that she has learned from a long career in investing.
The lessons I've learned really have come from, I think, just getting to know myself better and understanding, as I've taken on more in the way of leadership roles, understanding what works and what doesn't work for individuals. And it's very different. You need a different leadership style sometimes. You know, as I say, I've tried to always be genuine and transparent as a leader, but some people need more help or more support than others. And it's just understanding how people work and trying to make sure you're there for people.
She had role models in place herself from the very beginning and throughout her career. And I asked her what she has learned from them and what she is passing on.
My mum worked full time and she was a huge part of my push to go to university. So I was the first in our family to go to university, but she was very keen for me to go to university. And she was very supportive of me doing so. I then had actually one person who, when we moved from Exeter to London, took me under his wing. And what I really liked about him was we would go and do a presentation together, and he'd come back to the office and we'd say, let's go and have a cup of coffee. Let's go through the presentation. How can you improve? And he'd say things such as, well, we didn't do very well with this slide. Perhaps we can do something better. And actually, you did very well with that slide. And it taught me that actually people like good feedback and constructive feedback, but in a way that doesn't personalize it to them. I often think if it's getting a defensive response, you probably need to stop the conversation and then start it again. Because I think if you get into that defensive response, the person is not listening. The person's not listening to the feedback. They're just responding in that way because actually they just don't want to listen. So there's two things I would say is, one, always try and give timely feedback. So I had a situation a number of years ago where I had to give some feedback, and somebody was going on 3 weeks holiday. And I remember I did talk to my husband about this. I said, look, I don't know if I want to give her this feedback or before she comes. And when she comes back, he said, when she comes back, it's too late. You might not want to do it now, but actually it was about some behavior. You should do that feedback now. And I did it, and actually behavior changed and it was fine. If somebody's not really being responsive, I think you need to look for good examples when you can say to them, do you remember we talked the other day about X and you got defensive? Actually, I've just observed it with you doing exactly the same thing with wherever it may be. So perhaps we can now talk about how I can work with you to make this better. So again, it's not giving feedback that just says that's not good. It's actually saying, I've observed this. How can I work with you to make this better? Because you don't want to just give negative feedback or bad feedback. You want to actually make sure somebody's going to improve as a result of that, or, you know, in themselves improve.
Let's hear Deb's final thoughts as she embarks on the next chapter.
Take the opportunities that come. Don't be afraid. There's enough people around to help support you. So always take the opportunities that come. So I am a taker of opportunities.
Sharmila Kassam was recently appointed to the role of Chief Operating Officer at NASDAQ Asset Owner Solutions. Based in Texas, she also has a portfolio of board roles. She's a senior fellow at the Milken Institute and was previously Deputy Chief Investment Officer of the Employees Retirement System of Texas, a public defined benefit plan with around $30 billion in assets under management. There, she held a series of roles for almost 12 years. We talked at length about building better boards and how boards can be a lightning rod for diversity and change. But there is still a distinct absence of role models in place.
So board service is something that I think some of us have never really been able to understand from the perspective of what we grew up with. I didn't necessarily have role models that had served on boards. It has seemed like a very exclusive type of space, but there's been a lot of discussion, rightfully so, for all the reasons why there should be different viewpoints, and including having women at the table that have traditionally not been included in board service. I work with a few organizations, particularly one called AIF, Alternative Investor Forum, and they appreciated from their investor base that there is a call for diversity. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion in the public company arena about increasing the number of women on boards. There's even been statutes passed in California. I know in Europe, there's certain requirements of having so many women represented. And I think what the next step is really getting these women into the pipeline. And so I feel like many of us have been in front of boards in our seats, like you was facing the board on a regular basis, very strategically involved. And then we had the added burden of doing it in a fishbowl where it was often publicly conducted. So the experience there, I think, is a natural fit to try to leverage it into either a public or private company that's really trying to understand what their investors do. So my focus has been really just, a lot of people say they want to get on boards, is helping people understand what that means, the fiduciary responsibility, the aspect of not really being in the weeds, but providing your strategic guidance and oversight, which is a very different element than doing the work, which is what most of us did to get to where we are in our careers, as well as getting companies and private equity firms to understand that there's these pipelines that are outside of their own networks, outside of recruiters often, where they can find talented women across industry. So we're working on an ecosystem with several of the large private equity companies, as well as I think there's a slower movement, because it is difficult in the mutual fund space, to bring some diversity on that front as well. So I look forward to continuing that work with other kind of leaders in the industry. And I think this may be the time that the stars align for all of this.
We also talked about how to be an effective contributor at a board meeting.
I think it all becomes about context right now. And maybe you'd agree with this, that at the time, the deal seems the most important, or kind of that board meeting seems to be what you're focused on. And you're a little bit almost letting that momentum guide you instead of having the broader perspective of the failures as well as the wins. But sometimes the failures are even more important, as much as most of us, because of our own personalities, don't like to fail, because you learn from them. And so I actually think that the challenges are actually ones that I wish I had known were the ones to spend more time reflecting on, to be able to kind of have the better successes going forward, rather than seeing everything as a, zero-sum game.
Finally, in this episode, we meet with another veteran of London investment management circles, Caroline Burton. Caroline has had a portfolio career which includes roles as an independent advisor to local authority pension plans and a non-executive director role. She previously spent over 25 years at the Guardian Royal Exchange, where she was promoted to manager at the age of 28. She retired from that organisation in 1999. I first asked Caroline about her advice for progressing through the ranks of corporate life.
I think I'd say you've got to stay flexible, you've got to keep listening, and you've got to never believe your own PR. One of my colleagues used to have a little sign on her desk which said, "Never confuse brains in a bull market." I think as an investor, my core beliefs are that things are changing all the time, and that investment is very much a fashion business. And you've got to be able to identify when those changes in fashion happen, and also not to get sucked into investing in things because they're fashionable. As an investor, I think what I was best at was spotting changing trends, rather than necessarily being the very best at saying you should buy stock X rather than stock Y.
She has a clear sense of the role of the non-exec and the crucial differences between it and an executive role.
I think as a non-executive, your role really is to support the team who do the management of the business day to day, but to question them. And I always think it's like holding up a mirror a lot of the time, showing people how it looks in the mirror and saying, is this really what you mean? Is this really what you want? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? But it's very different from the executive role. I mean, I think the best description I was ever given by it was by a friend. And she said, well, it's very simple. Eyes on, hands off. And I think that's it. I'm grateful, though, that I became a non-executive before I ceased being an executive. I think it was much easier to develop an appropriate style as a non-exec while doing the other role, because you would feel the differences and the tensions all the time. As far as what I bring to the local authority role, it's strategic investment views and the ability to challenge managers and also challenge the investment consultants. And a lot of the time, I would say over all the years I've been doing it, the most important thing I've said to people is, don't do this. You bought a certain manager because you like their style. The style's currently out of fashion at the moment. Within their style, they're doing all right. Don't sack people at the bottom of the performance cycle. Hang on in there. And on the other side, you'll be bought a lot of products to look at and be told they're wonderful and fashionable and the greatest thing ever. Don't get sucked into things just for the sake of it. Make very sure that these are things that really fit your strategy, that really differentiate, that really are going to add value. I mean, I always used to say, people, there used to be that big conference down at Southampton, which then I think moved to somewhere out in Wales. And my first question to committees coming back from that is, well, what are they trying to flog you this time? I thought I've always seen part of my role as to protect by assisting people in questioning things.
Caroline had a fascinating perspective as to what happens when a non-executive role ends.
Suddenly, you go. It's a bit like being on a ship that comes into port and you get off the boat and the boat sails off, and for a little while people wave at you goodbye, and then the ship disappears into the distance and it's going on and its life is going on, and you're left behind on the quay.
So some fascinating insights there on the key differences between executive and non-executive roles. I hope you've enjoyed listening to these tips for the next chapter. Follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.